back to how many people want poetry to blow up, or how they want it to be in a bigger hemisphere. You know, we had Brandon Leak win America's Got Talent. We have Amanda Gorman out in these streets after the inauguration. Right. And I almost wondered, is that even, number one, is that even possible with the medium? Number two, do we even want that? Like, it's one of those things where it's like, be careful what you ask for.
I feel like, I mean, they're gonna let it happen, right? That's where I feel like we're at. We've had these little convulsions where, you know, whether it's poets having television shows now, or poets doing radio, poets doing movies, like that's not a new thing now. But we're definitely in a phase where we should be questioning why those poems are being put on that stage. And that's not to say they're bad poems or they're good poems. That's just to say, why, you know, is it a good thing? Like, are they making the public critically interrogate things more? Or are they just doing it because it's a really good optic, you know, to seem like you're intellectually engaged or like you care about poetry? Or are they picking people who don't do scary work? I think there's that too, right? Like I said, you know, I'm very happy for Amanda Gorman. I think she represents a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? But I also feel like I want to see what she writes 10 years from now. I also want to see what she writes when she's not vetted by a corporate entity, by like the NFL or the government. Because before any inaugural poet gets on stage, they vet their poem, right? So whatever we're judging has gone through some stuff before we even got to experience it. It's not like when a lot of poets write their poem, and if it gets vetted in a workshop or it gets vetted at an open mic. You know, that's a different kind of vetting. It's not the same.
Definitely, I definitely agree with that. And it reminds me that certain conversations, certain kitchen table talk, it's almost like we got to be careful of, I personally have to be careful where to have that and who to have that with, because I find myself, don't you slander that girl on a public forum and have me find out, because that's coming with a whole other baggage, and it's going to be a whole bunch of issues if you come at her wrong. So it's like, right.
And I also feel like too, it's like, are you slandering her because you really don't like the poems or you don't like what she represents? And that's why I said what I said, because I'm like, I have questions, right? That's just like, there was talk, I don't want to, you know, banter around names, but there was somebody on the internet who was talking about somebody's work. They were basically subtweeting, and you knew they, apparently other people knew they were talking about somebody. And I said, who does that, right? Like, I just responded to the tweet, like, who does that particular thing? And then somebody tweeted me back and they were like, oh, they're talking about person C because they're homophobic and blah, blah, blah. I said, wait, person C can write. Like, when I heard the person's name, I'm like, why? Like, I had question mark. Like, how did you say that that writer does that when I know they don't do that, you know? So you have to ask yourself, what is that kind of subcutaneous layer of loathing and fat that makes them say something ugly about people? It's the same thing like when you're in a writing workshop. Some people really want to help you, and some people have no idea what the hell they're talking about or what kind of baggage they've brought into talking about your work. So you may have to take it with a grain of salt, right? Like, no.
Hold up, we gonna do this right here.
Oh, you need to sip the water behind that comment. Okay, I'll sip as well.
That wasn't even, my throat was really scratchy. Like, that was, yeah, but at the same time,
I'm glad I didn't have the tea. I would have just.
You're right. but at the same time, I've had that type of conversation multiple times, and it's one of those things where I gotta be like almost where I gotta be like, I gotta separate it. Great writer, suck a human being. And especially as a curator, honestly, where because certain people, I don't care how talented you are, you're not on my show for a multitude of reasons. But you have to separate that. So to really have the best kind of conversations, and also know where exactly people are coming from when they do give critique as a whole. I've had to deal with that with my MFA program. It's kind of why I'm kind of PTSD out this bitch. But at the same time, again, people really do want to help you, and you got to do that mental work of separating the two. As you were writing Break the Habit, because that came at a time where a lot of things were changing in your life as well. I'm not going to get into that. Have you had to do that, like do those type of mental leaps as well, especially with certain subject matter? And if so, how were you able to get through it, especially doing a PhD program?
Well, like I said, I think, again, the people that I worked with really believed in me and wanted to affirm that I just needed to write. Like, Tara, you just need the space to write, just write. And I really love that Maria encourages that with all of her students, right? But for me, I feel like if you want to be a good writer, you have to step into that fearlessness. And I really love writers who do that. Like Sharon Olds was one of those people for me. Toy Darracott, Afa Weaver, people who talk about these really difficult things and find ways to make it artful, to make it moving. Because you could say something horrible happened to you, but to make it artful is really difficult, right? And I've been trying to do that. Or it's like, so I'm not going to go into detail about the whole book, but with Break the Habit, it was about my divorce, and I started thinking about not just were the moments that made me horribly sad and I knew things were closing, but what were the moments that made me love this person, right? Because we forget that, right? Like I think a lot of people think when you have a breakup or you have a divorce, you just be like, I hate this person. I hate everything they stand for. And you start sounding like Dave Chappelle. But if you're old enough to remember Dave Chappelle, I feel like some people are like, what is that? But it's on Netflix. Y'all will figure it out. If you want to go there, because I know some people don't like him now. But it's you were there for a reason, right? Like you liked them at one point. You maybe loved them at one point. There was something likable that made you accommodate them in your space and time. And yes. I said, I want to make a conscious effort to balance that out. And I've talked about that a lot as a teacher. Like, what do you do to have gravity and levity? Right? And that's a hard balance to strike in a manuscript. It's really easy to go all the way in the paint and be like, everything is horrible. But then you got to figure out, okay, what makes you deal with the horrible? Or at least do this. Because if you don't balance out that scale, nobody's going to want to read that book. And do you want to read it? Like after it's done, do you just want to be like, oh, I've survived it and put it on a shelf and never look at it again? Like, I think there's something to that.
I'm gonna just say I needed to hear that for this third book I'm working on. So thank you for that. Thank you for that reminder. It's funny because the title of it is Happy Endings Are Earned. So it's like, how do you get to that happy, and what does that happy ending look like? Right. I think that's one of the things, in terms of gravity and levity, in terms of balance, we talk about what, what's the happy side of it, or what's the light of it? How do you get to that point without it sounding forced? Does the poem, even in a singular poem, does the poem earn, I guess, that happy ending, or is it something that you're trying to force? Like, this ain't where it's at right now. Where do you find, how do you make that decision within your own writing? Like, this piece is going to stay in this tone because that's where I'm at with it. But the other piece, I can actually get some light into there, or maybe it needs to go a little dark. Like, how do you feel that out for yourself in your own writing?
I mean, you gotta think about how joy materializes for you, right? Like, there's one poem in the book where I talk about being, that little shuttle that's the airline shuttle that's in Newark. So
Mm-hmm.
be on that train, and there was one night I went to go meet a friend who had just flown in from Brazil. So I'm on the shuttle to go meet her, but I'm the only one on the shuttle. And I was listening to some music, and that's where the Cure song came on. So I'm listening to this Cure song, and I'm remembering it because Adele is doing a cover of it. But
Mm-hmm.
I used to sing that song when I was like 13 years old. So I'm sitting there and I'm like feeling very nostalgic. And I just started being silly because no one was on the train with me. So just that image of me singing it out loud on the train, full volume. And I'm like, yeah, we have those moments, right? Where we just do something that's a little impetuous or a little bit funny or a little bit sweet. And we don't always remember them. But it's kind of like, again, why does that story stick with you? Why did you do that absurd thing, that made you a little bit happy? You know, tell the story behind that.
Definitely. Now I'm gonna have to incorporate that into writing prompts that we're doing, just to kind of force that out of me and others, or remind rather.
But I think it's a maturity thing too, because happiness is so rare. you know, Happiness is not easy to come by, especially when you think about where we're at right now. It would be really easy to be depressed. I'm not gonna judge anybody if they don't want to write a happy poem right now.
That's where this all this came from.
But it's like you take it where you can get it, right? Like I feel like the more you experience, because a lot of things happened to me when I was working on that second book. It was like it wasn't just the post-divorce book. That was the book where my mother was diagnosed with multiple myeloma and she died, I think, before the book got, yeah, she died before the book got published. It was done, but she died before it got published. And then my dad had died, I think, the year before. So it's like I lost my parents. I was divorced. I was about to move back here. I didn't know where I was going to be working. So there's like this convolution of things. And it was like, again, one of the things that I've been thinking about as I teach in the prison is that whole thing of gratitude. And I think gratitude is also an exercise in observation, right?
Mm.
It's not just what poets do. I think it's what grateful people do because you pay such close attention to what's in front of you in a different way when you're grateful for it.
For real. You really do. Like it balance, like working on that intentionally, it helps you balance things out, and it keeps you sane.
Yeah.
Um, it's definitely kept me sane throughout this time. And I think other people have been looking for spaces, and especially in these crazy times, just for that. And that's why everybody went virtual. Um, you know what? Your stance, like with everything that happened and everything going virtual, with you even doing virtual readings on things such as this, like how has the transition been for you in that regard, Because some people are loving it. Some people are loving it, like, okay, I ain't gotta see people in the flesh for a bit.
Part of me loves that. Part of me also hates it. And I mean, honestly, before the pandemic, I was trying to encourage people to let me do stuff via Skype and Zoom because I'm not a university professor. I never got the tenure track job that everybody says somebody like me should have. So I was like, okay, there's no university flying me out on their dime to present at your conference for free. just have me zoom in. And some of my colleagues were very accommodating in terms of helping me do that. You know, I think of, I think it's Isaac Ginsberg Miller, who's working on his PhD at Northwestern. We did a panel for AAIHS that way. I did a panel with Damaris Hill and a couple other folks about the work of Lucille Clifton for WSA, which is the National Women's Studies Association. And I Skyped in. There's even a picture of me on the internet where I'm on the Skype screen and they're holding up the computer and everybody else is in the picture. But I did that before shelter in place because it is prohibitively expensive to fly out for a conference, make sure you have an outfit, make sure you got a hotel stay, and you can eat while you're there, you know, and you usually stay a couple days. It's just, it was too much. I was like, you know, I don't want to pretend anymore that, and that's the sad truth about academia, is that there are a lot of people who financially pretend that this is an economically feasible model when you're not reimbursed and you're not funded to be a scholar. And I just did not want to participate in that, but I do want to try to create new knowledge, create new ways of thinking about literature and the things that we care about. So I was already like, hey, just put me on Skype. I'm good. You know? But it's been kind of nice to not commute. It's been nice to declutter and reorganize my house and, you know, have space to think. I have so many ideas for new books now.
Hmm.
I just need to start writing more regularly. But I think because I've been doing a lot of virtual work, sometimes that's what slows me down a little bit. But it's all been good stuff. Ooh, excuse me.
Got you, got you. Let me just say this real quick. Let me just get this out, get this out of my system real quick. Pay the poets, pay the poets, pay the poets. Okay, I'm done. Because literally what you just said is part of why I pulled out of or had a back and forth with academia to the point where I'm like, y'all not paying me enough to stress about certain shit that I don't even that I personally had to learn to care about as a writer in that field. And it just made me want to do my own thing as a result. That pushed me to create EvoluCulture Ventures ultimately. Which brings me to the spaces that you're creating for writers. If you could speak a little bit about the Whirlwind Center.
Thank you. I'm so excited to tell you about it. And there will be more updates soon. We initially looked at a building that is not too far from where I live that went up for sale. I'm looking at other buildings now because the original building was sold. But we've been doing virtual programming during the pandemic, primarily a comedy show called Liberation Laughs. And Whirlwind Center was kind of this idea where I wanted to offer classes around arts and culture, like literature, book clubs, maybe some visual art classes or bookmaking, and, you know, depending on the space, maybe dance classes and somatic therapy. But then I also was like, okay, if we're looking at doing something on the South Side that is directed towards a Black community, I want to think about, one, what are the kinds of activities that people want in the community? Like, can we do, I know some people have brought up sewing circles and knitting circles, you know, which would be great because if you can make a slew of baby hats for babies in a NICU, that might can make a difference, you know what I mean? Or you make hats and gloves for people when they're homeless, or we've had a lot of mutual aid efforts here in Chicago. I would love to be able to tell one of them, look, we got a knitting circle, we made 20 scarves and 20 hats. Where do you need them? You know, so it could kind of be that kind of social service work. And also, like, I found a friend of mine who said she would do tax preparation services. Another friend of mine said she would come in and do a doula training, you know, which when you know about what infant mortality rates look like in the Black community, that's that's a very essential kind of service that people don't always have access to. So I'm thinking about that kind of stuff and it being in an intimate kind of space where people don't feel intimidated by it. Because I feel like some of the places where the arts exist in Chicago that are really well funded, either they exist way on the north side, past downtown, or they're so intimidating. They look like these corporate monoliths that are like all glass, or they're too nice and too precious to touch. So I want to try to create a different kind of space with Whirlwind Learning Center in doing that.
That's key right there. You have to think about what it's almost like, have you gotten too big for yourself? Have you gotten too big to be about the people? And it could look like that for certain organizations that may or may not be under fire lately. we go keep right there.
But you know what? I also feel like it's not even just what does it look like to people. I feel like if you do activities and things that make people feel like it's not a space where they would normally frequent, then that's kind of strange. Or if you've been on the South Side, there's so many buildings that have been torn down. There's so many empty lots. There's so much absence of that kind of cultural ecology. Not to say that there isn't a cultural ecology, because there is, right? We've always had the Southside Community Arts Center. We've always had DuSable, or rather, we've had it for a long time. Um, we now have the Gary Comer Youth Center, which is a new space. But I feel like there's a lot that could still be added to that community. There's lots of venues and things here. ETA, for example, um, historically the new apartment lounge was where Von Freeman did regular jazz sets on the South Side. I don't think it's around anymore. It closed a long time ago, but when you think about that, it's been there, but what do we do to preserve and sustain it, but then also make room to cultivate and support new artists, to support young people, to support elders who have stories to tell? Like there's a lot that can be thrown into the mix that, never has enough encouragement. You could be encouraging already, but there's room for more, is what I'm saying.
Right. And like immediately once you said that, I started thinking about here in Newark, we have a lot of new housing that's going up, including a project that alludes to what Amiri Baraka tried to do years ago. But there's also the Gilbert Gant Collective, one of the buildings on one of our streets being refurbished into artist housing as well as public performance spaces. So it's always something that can be added, especially if as more stories need to be told, as more narratives are coming out, as more people are looking for space that resonates with them and is close to them in some way, shape, or form, so that they feel like they are at home, even though they're not at home, if that makes any sense.
Right. And that's so important. Like, I think about, now that you say that, and you bring up Baraka, it's like Baraka would have, him and Amina would have readings and events at their house.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were just on the scene, they'd just be like, yeah, here's the address, come over. It's on this day. And then Abiodun Oyewole of The Last Poet, same thing. Every Sunday, he has a regular gathering at his apartment. And they'll come and tell stories, and they talk about Black history, and they share poems, and they listen to music. And, that's a very formative, inspiring kind of space for a lot of young artists. And I think we need that. It doesn't just need to be you come out for the flex, you do your poem, and you leave. It needs to be a space that's more intimate sometimes, where people can get to know each other and encourage each other in myriad ways, Or I think about Walk Writers in Brooklyn, run by Oya BC, where she's doing workshops where there's women of color facilitators and it's for women of color, right? That kind of mentorship can be very small and intimate, but it's very necessary.
Absolutely. Pink Door also comes to mind.
Right.
That ritual as well. And spaces in Newark like the Cryout Cave, currently finding a new building, where it's like intimate, but it's about family. It's about really, experiencing certain things. And I know people who've been to the Baraka House for what you've mentioned
Right.
before Amiri passed away. And we still see Amina out here, pre-COVID, of course, but we still see Amina out here doing her thing as well. So like it's important. It's important to have, people. I get wanting to blow up. I get wanting to be, traveling and things of that nature. But it's important to have that space where it is local, but you're able to cultivate because that's how movements begin, and
Right.
that's within. And so if that's your work, then that's the work. That's what your calling. That's what your calling needs to be.
And
And I'm saying that he needs to hear that for himself.
I also kind of feel like too that the people who have access to universities are not always the people who I enjoy teaching. I mean, I didn't think I'd ever say that because that was the dream to teach at a university to be a professor, right? But I do
Mm.
feel like one, sometimes I want people who can push a little bit further, a little bit harder, or sometimes I want to teach people who are from the South Side, or I want to teach, you know, predominantly Black classrooms. And I want to work with women and I want to work with women of color. And I think, you know, it's good to ask that question. Like one time I was talking to Nate Marshall and he was considering a job and I said, well, what kind of students do you want to teach? Where do you want to be? And he just kind of paused for a second and was like, that's a good question. And I'm like, that's the question you should always ask. Where do you want to be? Whether you're teaching or doing anything else, making widgets, whatever, you need to ask yourself where you want to be.
I think that's the key with anything. Like
Right.
I'm currently out of academia. I'm out of education as a whole. 7 years trying to be a professor or trying to be a teacher, but it wasn't my ministry. And as my current supervisor, my other job says, the pandemic made me realize that. But I'm still feeling somewhat of a pull to do workshops at some point. So it's like, who are the people you want to reach out to, and what is your state of being? Where do you want to be right now? And I think a lot of people, because of everything that's going on, is having to reevaluate that,
Right.
as they should.
I feel like I kind of want more intellectual exchange, but I'm also at this point where I'm like, if I'm not teaching, I'm okay. I'm okay without doing it somewhat, right? Like it's okay if I want to spend some more time just reading, doing my own writing, editing projects, you know what I mean? Doing things that are a little bit out of my comfort zone because teaching has kind of become a comfort zone for me. You know, it's an easy thing for me to do. It's a lot of energy, but it's still an easy thing for me to do.
Mm.
So now I'm like, okay, what if I put that much energy into my writing? What if I put that much energy into co-editing this book or deciding, you know, I want to do this or that? You know, I haven't really done that. It's been a life of service and I'm like, I can serve me too now.
And in turn, serve others, because we are looking for that next Dr. Terabez project. I'm definitely am. Um, we got one more question. I just want to say thank you for, just having, it's been what, damn near 10 years, damn near a decade
It
since
might
we
be
spoke.
longer. It might be long. Well, no, we've talked since then.
Yeah,
We've talked within the past 10 years for sure. But
right. But nothing like this, like a sit down, in some way, shape, or form.
is it gonna age you if I ask when did you graduate from Rutgers?
2011. Well, undergrad or grad? 2011 for grad. For
Yeah.
undergrad,
So
excuse me.
it's been 10 years since I saw you on campus.
Yeah. Wow. And I'm still here trekking. I'm still here doing what I need to do as an artist, as a curator, and you are one of the main reasons why that is so. So it's funny. I saw Susan L. Miller not too long ago because I did a reading for Rutgers, New Brunswick. And now to see you, I'm gonna just say this on a personal note, seeing y'all revitalized me at a key time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Last question for you. And normally I ask, what does it mean for you to be next up? But you are Dr. Tara Betts. So to the poets who are next up, what would you like to say to them?
Oh boy, so many things I could say. I would probably say remain tenacious and persistent. That will be your greatest asset because you will hear no a lot. You will hear yes, hopefully, but you'll hear no a lot. Read voraciously, probably read more than you write, but write regularly. It's all the same advice. But also, if there's other things you want to do besides read and write, do some of those things. That's the one thing I would do differently. Like I probably would have traveled more. I probably would have been a little bit more, I would have took more risks. I'll just say that. That's the nice answer. I would have behaved less and took more risks. But if you got to take a calculated risk because you can't afford to mess up everything, do that.
Definitely understand, but thank you so much. I leave the floor to you for your last poem, and thank you so much once again. Ladies and gentlemen, artists and art lovers, for the final time, Dr. Tara Betts.
Right. So I'm going to close with a poem that's in my new manuscript for Refuse to Disappear. And it's called Fubu, after the Solange Knowles. Fubu. I am sitting in a cafe with my boy that I have known longer than my students have been alive. Before the birth of his firstborn son, and the waiter wears a tight black camisole with bright green beads. We smile because he is living his joy. And how many people do that on the daily? And how many of us know that joy like pink and blue hair clips latched onto flawless waves? And we must know someday where we are as serene as Solange Knowles' expression, always shaming Mona Lisa, who never knew about the ice grill or paper cranes. I find myself wanting to raise my fist like I'm in an elevator with my sister's husband talking sideways, but I have no sisters as blood kin. I find myself wanting to celebrate all the history that made me and be a little gutter too, because once I carry it in my pocket, it's my slingshot and my stone, rubbed smooth by fingers and time. I find myself counting the sway of what I claim and protecting it like the last medallion that could be stolen.
Thank you so much. Where can they find you?
Oh my goodness. I am on the Twitters. I am at Tara Betts on the Twitters, TARABETTS. I am on Instagram. I don't post there as much. And I'm still on Facebook sometimes. I need to get my website up to date again. So I'm not there yet, but you can find me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Betts. Thank you for your you, and thank you for your ascension. That is going to do it for us here at Next Up. I am Sean Battle. Remember, you are loved, you are beautiful, you are valued, and no matter what you go through, may you always kick out at 2.